morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the editorial director with Data Science Central and also chief data scientist for Data Magnum. So I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Alteryx for sponsoring today's event. Alteryx is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Teradata, Crowdflower, Tableau, Hubble, Dell Statistica, and Exaptive, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's webinar is entitled Practical Applications of Data in Politics. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We'll have 4 presenters that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. So I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Raman Kaler, Nick Tussing, Danielle Mendheim, and Mundus Momberg. Now, Raman is an alliance manager at Alteryx, where she focuses on defining strategy and executing programs for joint marketing efforts with key strategic partners. And she currently focuses on partner marketing with Amazon Web Services, Cloudera, Databricks, and Salesforce. Nick is a solution engineer with Alteryx. He partners with sales to demonstrate and facilitate client understanding of Alteryx. Nick holds an MBA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and an MBA in secondary education and teaching from the University of Colorado, Denver. Now, Danielle, a database analyst, is passionate about ensuring that technology behind Deeproot's multi-source data approach is accurate and efficient. She graduated from Grove City College with a degree in mathematics and loves multiple page calculations. She gained most of her experience in retail and medical market analytics, but was baptized into the political arena with the challenge of working for a candidate vying for the 2016 presidency. Now, Mundus is a solution architect and part of the partner migration team at Amazon Web Services. In this role, Mundus focuses on helping AWS partners plan, build, and deploy migration factors for themselves and their customers. Technology is his passion, and staying up to date and relevant with this technology discipline is a core aspect of who he is. So thanks for being with us today, Raman, Nick, Danielle, and Mundus. We're looking forward to your presentation. Pardon me, I went a little too far. There we go. It goes without saying, but we live in a very data-rich age. In the political arena, sophisticated analytics firms like Deeproot manage and analyze an ever-growing list of data sources to project voter turnout and predict vote choice. To do this, they must first access and acquire the data, and then build complex data blending and analysis workflows, turn a variety of unlinked data sources into a single actionable database of information. So only then can they decide which voters to speak with and what messages and through what media. So in today's webinar, you'll see how Alteryx, Amazon Web Services, and Deeproot Analytics work together to leverage numerous data sources to quickly deliver critical insights, and you'll see how to quickly blend and analyze data from all sources, cloud and local, apply predictive and geospatial analytics to big data, and enable data analysts with cloud computing power of Amazon Web Services. So Raman, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we cover practical applications of data in politics with Alteryx and Amazon Web Services. We hope you find the content helpful for furthering your analytics practice regardless of your industry. In terms of our schedule today, I'll kick it off by delivering an overview of the benefits of using Alteryx with AWS, and then I'll hand it over to Mundus, who will brief us on the data warehouse possibilities with AWS before handing it over to Danielle, who will then cover deep root analytics challenges before using Alteryx with AWS, as well as the results they achieved afterwards. Finally, Nook will conclude the presentation with a demo of how to build a workflow in Alteryx using data from Amazon Redshift, and then he'll output the results in Tableau, and we'll conclude with time for Q&A from the audience. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. As you know, a variety of data can be stored within AWS. But while there is a plethora of key organizational data in AWS, data typically needs to be blended with other data sources to produce impactful insights. A few months ago, Alteryx conducted a survey of data analysts and asked them how many data sources they needed to make a decision. Based on the findings, it's clear that there's been a fundamental shift over the course of just a few years. In many organizations, it used to be that IT blended data and then pushed it to the data warehouse. But despite all the excellent work that IT groups have done in creating centralized data management, analysts are still faced with the tasks of creating the specific analytic data set that they need. Only 6% of analysts have all their data in one place, and the majority of analysts have to pull data from 5 or more sources, including spreadsheets, cloud applications, social media, and that data warehouse I just mentioned. In order to prep and blend all of this data needed for analysis, many analysts turn to manual scripting or spreadsheets like Excel, which takes time. We all know Excel is great for financial calculations and basic data manipulation, but what happens when you need to blend 2 or more sources of data together? It requires a VLOOKUP function, which is pretty finicky about how data needs to be set up, and it can only blend data from 2 or more sources at a time. 2 sources at a time. For the majority of analysts who are blending 5 to 10 sources of data together, using Excel's VLOOKUP function over and over makes spreadsheets brittle and error-prone. Furthermore, analysts just can't pick up one another's spreadsheet and immediately figure out how data is being prepped and blended, should there need to be a transfer of work. Apologies, getting ahead of myself. On the flip side, there are data prep and blending options from legacy analytic solutions such as SAS, Oracle, IBM's SPSS, SAP, and others. There are powerful solutions in the hands of data scientists who have years of training and experience writing complex code, but for the line of business data analysts, this steep learning curve impedes their ability to prep, blend, and analyze the data they need. This leaves analysts like you stuck in the gap between the simplicity of Excel and the complexity of products like SAS. We at Alteryx built Alteryx with you in mind, with the right combination of ease of use and the ability to handle the most complex analysis. Alteryx is the leading platform for self-service data analytics. It provides analysts with a unique ability to easily prep, blend, and analyze all of their data using a repeatable workflow, then deploy and share analytics at scale for deeper insights in hours, not weeks. With Alteryx, you can connect to and cleanse data from various sources, easily join data from multiple sources, and perform analytics, be it predictive, statistical, or spatial. You can operationalize your analytics by deploying production processes, schedule and scale your analytic workflows, and even publish analytic apps for customized insights. All of this empowers data analysts and the line of business users to perform their own analytics, rapidly process large volumes of data without writing any code, and output analytic results to all popular formats, including Tableau. In terms of how Alteryx works with AWS specifically, as you see here, using the two together, you can deliver faster insights from your AWS data warehouse. You can quickly blend and analyze data from all sources, cloud and local, apply predictive and geospatial analytics to your big data, and enable your organization's data analysts with the power of Amazon Redshift. So how exactly does Alteryx work? As previously mentioned, Alteryx allows analysts to connect to and cleanse data from various sources, easily join this data together, then perform analytics using the same intuitive drag and drop user interface without writing any code. With Alteryx, you use the same workflow to enrich your data if need be, and then perform the analysis. We have relationships with some of the leading providers of third-party data, so you can enrich your internally collected data with additional insight. The end result is that you can easily join data from multiple sources to create the analytic data set you need for analysis. The predictive capabilities are based on the R language, but we have created package tools that can simply be dragged and dropped into the workflow and then configured. These tools require no coding expertise, but if you do have an R programmer, they can customize these tools or even create their own tools to be reused in Alteryx. Our spatial analytics tools utilize data from TomTom to build trade areas based on drive times or other variables to do sophisticated location or geospatial analysis. Finally, it's important to make it easy to share the deeper insights you are producing. With a legacy analytic approach, analytic apps and reports often have to be created in another environment or custom coded. With Alteryx, this step is just added to the end of the workflow to enable reporting, output data for visualization, or create analytic apps that allow business decision makers throughout your organization to customize and run their own analytics without having you create custom reports each and every time. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mundus to provide an overview of Amazon Web Services. Mundus?
Thank you very much. So yeah, let's just talk a little bit about Amazon Web Services and Redshift. Most people are already familiar with AWS as a company, and specifically we built Amazon Redshift as a relational data warehouse for large enterprise customers as well as small startup companies to use to help them achieve what they need in their business analytics or business intelligence teams. So what exactly is Amazon Redshift? Amazon Redshift starts out as the basics. It's a fast, simple, and affordable data warehouse. It's massively parallel in that it allows you to scale out to the petabyte level with your data. But that doesn't mean that it only becomes viable or useful at petabyte level. It just means that it has the ability and the capacity to easily and cost-effectively scale out to petabytes worth of data. It's a fully managed service, so Amazon takes all that undifferentiated heavy lifting and takes it away from you and allows you to focus on your application or your business needs, and will manage the difficult parts of the actual clustering of the nodes and the clustering of the hardware underneath, and allows you to focus on your data and what you want to do with it. We have two types of platforms that's specified on magnetic hard drives or solid-state drives, and that comes in a different pricing. So depending on the type of queries that you're running and the data that you are trying to find and the data that you're trying to dive, you have an option in what type of platforms you want to run. It is very cost-effective that it can go into about $1,000 per terabyte per year, or as low as $1,000 per terabyte per year. And it starts at as little as 25 cents a quarter an hour. It has a lot of functionality that's built into it from the start, but it also allows you to add user-defined functions if you want to leverage additional power or custom queries or custom functionality in the database that allows the methodology of push-down queries into the Amazon Redshift cluster. Once again, it's as simple as creating your own UDF and inserting that into the cluster, and the cluster will distribute this query and run this query at a parallel level for your queries. As we already said, it is very easy to use. It provisions in a matter of minutes, and it provisions to the point that you need it. If you want to start out very small with your data warehouse and kind of scale it over time, that is completely possible to do. You have complete monitoring capacity of every query that you run. So you can actually go in and see the amount of time that it took. You can see the query plan. You can see the DAG that it was constructed at. You have complete transparency in the queries and the queues that are being run on your cluster. It's as simple as pointing and clicking at the website to resize your cluster. Or you could monitor it using some of our cloud monitoring tools like CloudWatch, and using some scripting knowledge and our Lambda service, you could automatically scale the cluster as your needs increase. It's built for security, which means that all user access is controlled completely by you. AWS has no insight into your data, and no one will be able to access your data unless you explicitly give them the permissions and set up the permissions yourself. It's the interface and the API is obviously SSL secured. The actual data is encrypted, and you can also load up custom certificates to ensure that your data is more secure for you as well. It starts out with an automatic backup strategy that automatically backs up your data and replicates your data to at least 3 nodes. And it also automatically backups your data to a persistent backup in S3, which means that your data will always be available in S3 if anything should ever happen to your cluster. So let's look at a couple of common customer use cases. So a traditional enterprise running a data warehouse might look at using Amazon Redshift to reduce some of their costs by extending their data warehouse into AWS rather than adding on-premise hardware that, once again, isn't just the cost of the hardware, but is also the cost of the engineers and the platform teams and all the other intellectual properties that you need to impose on that cluster to keep it running. It's easy for you to migrate completely from an existing data warehouse and import and migrate that data into AWS data warehouses like Redshift. Redshift, as we already heard, has multiple sources that it can copy from, but leveraging one of our other services like EMR, you could distributively and very quickly copy large amounts or migrate large amounts of data from your on-premise data warehouse securely into Amazon Redshift. Companies with big data that has a big data requirement. Remember, big data doesn't just always mean that it has to be an enterprise level companies. Startups and small companies or medium enterprises today also work with big data. So they might be looking to improve their performance for interfacing with that data. And that's where Amazon Redshift comes in as well, because they might not have the teams available to manage their own on-premise or the money available to manage their own premise data warehouses and data lakes. But leveraging Amazon Redshift, that it makes it possible for them to interface with that data more effectively. It makes more data available for them for analysis, and it makes them smarter in their own businesses at a very low cost of entry to the company. And then SaaS companies can add additional analytic functionality to their applications because they can focus on their applications and worry about their applications more than they need to worry about the health of the cluster or the management of the cluster that's storing their data. And it can scale their data warehouse capacity as the requirement for that is. So they don't need to have this cost of entry or CapEx expenditure that they need to put out to initially get their data there. They can just scale out as they are going along. So how do we approach the Amazon Redshift data warehouse, or how do we as AWS see people using the data warehousing technology? Well, we wanted to make it cheaper for enterprise customers, for customers that work with big data, and we achieved that by cutting the cost by as much as 10% for most of our customers that traditionally used on-premise services. As I already said, it's very easy to provision. It allows your business analytics team and your business intelligence teams to be more productive, and it allows them to focus on what really matters to your business rather than actually looking at the underlying hardware and underlying cluster health, because we take care of all of that for you. You can easily plug in tools like Alteryx and other BI tools into Amazon Redshift and run your queries and generate your reports as required. The legacy view of data warehousing Traditionally, the big companies would work on it. They would essentially have their teams come in. They will sell it to the central IT team. The central IT team would be responsible for the data warehouse. They would be the ones managing it, making sure that it's healthy and that it's available to all the different teams. It's these multi-year commitments. It's a huge phase-out and deployment. It really takes a long time for customers or most traditional companies to really implement data warehousing. It's multi-million-dollar deals that usually go down. It's really usually a very expensive process for most companies. But we would like to change that, and we have changed that with AWS, because that type of implementation, that traditional implementation, leads to dark data, which means that the focus shifts away from the data and the intelligence that you can get from the data, but it shifts more to the actual maintenance of the cluster. And we very often see people approaching their data warehouses as a sort of pet. And the data warehouse health is more important for them, and the amount of data that they have in that cluster is more important for them than actually making sense of the data in there. It's usually this trade-off of people have these large amounts of data, but no way to really effectively access it, or it's a really painful process for the analysts and for the developers and for the engineers to access that data. With Redshift, we want to flip that around and give those people the power to make it more effective and easier for them to access. Amazon Redshift cuts down on long cycles and high cost of administration and brings it down to the bare basics for your team to focus on what's important to you. Push down queries, additional views, programmatic functions for your business makes it easier for your customers and for your business teams to interact with the data that you have. We are in the business of making sure that your data is easily available for you to make sense of that data. We manage the cluster on your behalf. We make it easy for you to scale it out. We make it easy for you to work with the data that you have, and you can forget about the difficulty of maintaining the underlying hardware. We take the undifferentiated heavy lifting away from you so that you can make sense of your core business and the data that you're gathering. I hope that I could have given you guys a little bit of a bare insight into AWS Redshift, and I hope you guys have, if you have any questions, just ask me afterwards. But for now, I'm going to pass it on to Danielle, who is going to talk to you guys about the Deeproot client story.
Thanks, Mandus. Yes, as Bill said at the beginning, my name is Danielle Mentime, and I am a database analyst for Deeproot Analytics. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about everything that we've been doing here at Deeproot, especially after hearing from Mandus, because a lot of what he said are things that we're implementing. So to just give you a kind of big overview of what we do here at Deeproot Analytics, we are a media analytics firm, and I like to think of ourselves as the bookends of the buy. So we like to help both the media buyers at the beginning to help them figure out where they want to place their ads, but then we're also able to do a lot of reporting after the fact by matching set-top box data to viewer ad occurrences. So we kind of offer a data management platform, and this allows media buyers to effectively and efficiently target a specific audience of people. So say it's a group of people in a specific DMA. We're kind of changing the way that media is measured, the way that it's valued, and even more so, the way that it's purchased and analyzed. So I kind of want to talk to you today about the problems that we faced at the beginning and how AWS and Alteryx used together were able to change that for us. So it's kind of easy to break down into 4 big problems that Deeproot Analytics faced. We faced an issue with volume, accuracy, speed, and automation. The issue that we faced with volume is, as Mandus mentioned earlier, we're dealing with billions and billions of rows, even as a small company. And oftentimes those billions of rows are too difficult to pass through individual CSVs or to try to blend multiple items. And so we needed a way that we could address these large amounts of data. And we have, I think last time I checked, about 20 billion rows, but that is growing by the day. I think I processed in almost 80 million the other day. Another issue that we faced was our accuracy. Oftentimes when people are handling multiple files, you end up with version 1, version 2, sometimes even version 10. And we needed to ensure that the accuracy of our data was not only what everyone was viewing, but that we had QA processes in place so that we could measure the mistakes that were possible and ensure that they didn't happen. The third issue that we faced was speed. We are a lot of our business is based in the political sphere, and so that means that we need to have quick turnarounds for all of our clients. Sometimes it's in a matter of days, and sometimes it's even in a matter of hours. And both Alteryx and AWS made that extremely possible and made it the best way for us to deliver items to our clients. And finally, this issue, we actually were able to address this fairly recently. I've only been at Deeproot for about 9 months now, and automation has been a very, very big item on our to-do list. And so we've been able to automate our processes thanks to Alteryx and AWS. Because oftentimes when you have a task that's maybe 5 to 10 minutes that takes up, your morning every day, if you multiply those 5 to 10 minutes times 5 days a week, times 21 days a month, times 12 months a year, those little tasks really start to add up. And so we needed to ensure that we were able to really automate every single process to spend our time wisely. So I want to talk a little bit about how Alteryx has helped us solve some of those problems. The first thing I want to discuss is Scheduler. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to invest in Server, although I would highly recommend it. But if you don't want to invest in Server, Designer is definitely a big item that I would say your company should have, even if you're a small company. Because being able to automate processes to run overnight on an EC2 instance or even on a local desktop enables you and your employees to get more done during the day and for you to allow to use bigger Redshift clusters in addition. So I would highly recommend using Scheduler in any way, shape, or form. Another one of my favorites that I use with Alteryx all the time are the macros. And I actually learned this tip from somebody at Inspire 2016 this year. Macros are extremely helpful for workflows where you want to accomplish multiple things in a sequential way. So say you want to be able to upload to S3 as well as copy into your Redshift data warehouse with all within one workflow. If you use nested macros, that really allows you to ensure that the data that's getting to S3 is finishing before you begin the copy into your Redshift cluster. So those two items would probably be my favorite pieces of Alteryx. Now I want to briefly discuss how AWS has really, really allowed us to kind of expand our bounds with Alteryx. So the way that we do our process is in a very, very circular motion. Oftentimes we connect to an API connection or to an outside data source. And like I mentioned before, we're handling millions to billions of rows. So if it's an API connection, my favorite method of pulling down is using Python. But you're actually able to directly connect to your S3 buckets using whatever language you choose. And so we use different APIs or even sometimes FTPs where we connect to the data source, we pull down the files, and we automatically upload them to S3. Again, I don't have to touch this process at all. The automation behind this is wonderful. And so it allows me to have processes run overnight and to make sure that we're not losing any pieces of data that are uploaded to S3 directly. Then oftentimes we pull down those files from S3 and we do a lot of data manipulation within Alteryx. So this involves the data cleanup, the data prep, all of the things that Raman was talking about earlier that are really hard to do when you're dealing with more than 2 data sources. So we pull them down, we do multiple items, and then we're able to actually upload those items directly with an S3 upload tool through Alteryx back to the S3 buckets. So then once it's on S3, we're able to kind of easily copy into our Redshift database. And that back and forth is so crucial in ensuring that you have an automated, fast, accurate process. And then finally, we can even pull down that data again into Alteryx and do even more with it. So it's really quite amazing to see how AWS with Alteryx has allowed us to kind of push not only the bounds, but kind of expand our own knowledge of what we were capable of doing. So now I kind of want to talk about some of a way that we've been using this in our everyday processes. So recently we acquired a data set through the FCC. So currently we match set-top box data for cable viewership to past ad occurrences, which allows us to see how many impressions an advertisement in the past received. Our hope for the future was that we would be able to predictively see how many impressions somebody would receive on TV. So we acquired this data set from the FCC, which shows all future buys of cable and broadcast buys in the future. And so what we're able to do is we're able to match that to set-top box data and see how many impressions a particular candidate or a particular person will get in the future. And so I'm going to kind of talk about some of the cool tricks that we found when dealing with this data set. Here are some quick tips for Alteryx and AWS. These are things that I've found extremely helpful in my journey with Alteryx. So first off, definitely use the direct input tool from Redshift tables, because unlike a flat file, you're able to maintain the types. And even more so, you can do direct select statements, you can do where clauses, you can do anything that you would do in a normal SQL environment right there in the input tool and bring it in for your workflow to use with all of the data. I'd also recommend taking advantage of the S3 upload and download nodes. Those have been super, super helpful on my end because I'm able to download ginormous files without needing space on my local machine or without needing space even sometimes on my EC2s. It just really saves a lot of time. Again, I would really encourage you that after you use those input tools to also use the dynamic input tool, because it allows you to filter down to only the data that you need. So if you see right there the little book node, that one is super cool. One of my coworkers recently discovered that, and that has made our workflows run, I want to say, 2 times faster, because it allows us to filter down to only data that we need in that particular join. Finally, this is my particular favorite tool. Make sure that you use the Alteryx command line tool. It's that little gray with the C. This is a developer's play toy, because you're really able to do almost anything with that tool, and even more so, you can automate it within Alteryx using Scheduler. So for instance, if you wanted to use a script to copy in something from an S3 bucket, that tool is extremely helpful. The reason why I oftentimes prefer that instead of using an S3 upload is because you can actually dynamically name the files with an action node as well as with an input node. So those are some of my favorite items. I'm willing to discuss them later on, and if you have any questions about them, I'm sure that everybody at Alteryx has used them extensively. So now, since I talked about FCC data, I would love to jump into a workflow that I created that is for ingesting that FCC data. So this particular data set is somewhat of a messy data set. So we needed a way of not only ingesting it, but putting it into, I want to say, 6 different Redshift tables all at once. And I didn't want this to be the type of process where we had to run a different script every day. I wanted it to be fully automated. So what we did is we utilized a lot of the items that I discussed previously. As you can see, we use an S3 download tool at the very beginning of the workflow. The data that's in that S3 bucket is from the API connection that automatically uploads the data itself. So we're able to pull that down and we're able to run it through this workflow. And if you can see, I have 6 different macros within this workflow, and the ones that have the same image do identical things. So the 4 with the deep root logo at the very end, those are all different AWS commands that copy into our data warehouse, and then the other 2 that are in the middle of the workflow, those actually allow us to do all of our data prep and all of our data management. And it's really cool because this workflow writes to all 6 of those tables, and it does it in a matter of 15 minutes, and it does it automatically after I leave the office. So it's really wonderful what you can do with AWS and Alteryx working together. So now really quick, before I wrap up, I want to show you what we were able to do with this shaped data modeled and kind of matched to the viewership. So here are some of our Tableau dashboards. This particular one is our DRP's dashboard. So what we were realizing is the hardest thing to measure when it comes to futuristic buys. You can know how much somebody has spent in the future, but you don't know how many impressions they may have on TV. So something that we wanted to measure here at Deeproot was how many impressions are they going to have? Now, this is a very rough estimate because, of course, there's a lot of cancellations. Some of FCC's records are not always as accurate as we would like. If you can see that gray bar with the little green dot, that's our way of estimating the number of impressions that that particular sponsor may have in that market. So this is something that's really, really helpful to our clients because they're able to see what their competitors are buying in the future, and not only what they're buying, but what the number of impressions is going to be. So then another dashboard that we have, this is called our statewide costs, and I picked Wisconsin. But our statewide costs allow us to do a really unique thing. We're able to see the cost per 1,000 impressions, and that's what CPM is here. So if you look at the top, we're able to kind of do some basic reporting just from the raw data where we can say how much each sponsor has spent in a particular given day. But then even more so, we can tell you how much what they have spent will give them a certain number of impressions by week as well as by a particular range. So these dashboards have really allowed our clients to kind of have a new viewpoint. And the best part about this, like I said at the very beginning, is that these dashboards automatically update on their own. So we don't necessarily need to republish these every day. We don't need to be working with messy CSVs or worrying about the accuracy of our data, all thanks to AWS and Alteryx. So on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Nick and let him have some fun with you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to step into a demonstration of the Alteryx platform, and I'm going to build out a workflow that's much simpler than the ones we saw on the screen there to give you an idea of how to use Alteryx and how easy it is to pick up the tool and start adding value to your organization. So as you can see, we have entered the Alteryx platform, and the platform is set up that there are tools across the top here, and each of these tools represents a function. So many of the ones that were mentioned we will also bring in this demonstration here. But
Nick, excuse me, it does not appear that your screen has shared.
Oh, thank you very much. Is it now sharing, hopefully?
Yep, looks good.
Yes. Thank you for interrupting me. All right, so sorry about that. And you should be able to see the Alteryx platform. And I'm going to build out a workflow here. The tools that we're going to use are on the top of the toolbar here, and each icon represents a different function. And you can see tools for reading in, writing out data, preparing your up your data, doing filtering, creating new columns, managing your data, and then tools for blending that data together, doing all those things like VLOOKUPs and joins and such. And these basic tools are the basic data preparation tools that we'll use. Typically people are going to start off with. So I'm going to grab an input tool, and the basic premise of this demo is we have two different data sources that we want to bring together to gain some insight. So we have customer data in a Redshift table, and we have our actual store database in a different data warehouse, and we want to be able to blend those together so that we can do some spatial analytics and calculate distances between customers and stores. And this could be very difficult in most other platforms and require many different tools. So I'm going to go ahead and connect out to data. You can see within Alteryx we can connect out to what I would call flat files, so things that would be sitting on your computer. This would include things like CSVs, all of the Microsoft set of tools, etc. But we're going to connect out to an Amazon Redshift database. So using a database connection, you would connect either through ODBC or OLEDB connection. And you can see I've got a Redshift connection set up here already that I'm going to go ahead and connect to. We can see all of the list of tables that we have in our database. Let me go grab the one that I would like. Using Alteryx, you do not have to know how to code, so we have many analysts who maybe don't have real strong SQL skills, but they could use a visual query builder to build out a query, make connections, and build out a query in a visual manner. But there is access to a full editor. So everything that you, any way that you would like to query that data from Redshift, you can do so. This is an editor. You can type directly into this, make changes, and so on. So I'm going to, for the demo, just grab this full table because it's fairly small for demo purposes, and bring that into the Alteryx platform. So we can see here we've got some basic customer data. The second data source that we wanted to leverage is a data source that is in a different location. So we need to blend data together. And I'm going to go and connect out to a different database. This happens to be a SQL database that's on-premise here. And this one's going to have my stores information. So to be able to manage these two data sources to do analytics, I need to get them both in the same location, which can be problematic in a lot of different instances. Now, if I look at these two data sources, they both have address information, address, city, state, and zip code. And that's the information that we're going to use to calculate distances between them. So I'm going to bring in some quick tools to manage the metadata here. Firstly, I want to go in and rename these columns because I have an address, city, state, and zip in both files, and I want to know which ones are my customers and which ones are my stores. So I'm going to just add a quick prefix to each of these, and we can see it's going to rename those columns. And I'll do the same thing inside of my data for my stores. So I'll add a prefix to that. Type in my prefix. Okay, so now I've got data where I've renamed some columns so that I don't have missing or matching or duplicate column names. And then I'm going to blend these two data sources together. So I want to join them. And I just grabbed a join tool, dragged it onto the canvas, connected the two data sources to it, and then I'm going to specify how I want it to join. So in this case, I want to join this store number, the store that each customer shops at most frequently, to the actual information about that store here. Notice they have different names. That's perfectly all right. Notice we could join on multiple criteria if we needed to, join, let's say, by store by date or something like that. So at this point in my workflow, if I hit run here, Alteryx is a runtime, or when you schedule a workflow to run at a certain time, it's going to go out and execute these queries, bring those data into the Alteryx platform, and process the join here inside of Alteryx. We can see that in the J output here, we have all of our different data blended together. On the L there would be anything that didn't join from my Redshift database, and the right would be anything that didn't join, and everything joined appropriately, so we're good there. Now, in order for me to actually do some spatial analytics in this, I'm going to need to use some of the additional spatial analytics tools inside of Alteryx. So the spatial analytics have two different categories that we're going to reference. The spatial tools here, which allow you to do things like create trade areas, calculate distances, but also going to access this address set of tools here that allows me to geocode the addresses to specific locations on the planet here. So first I'm going to geocode all of my customers. So I'm going to go in and select my customer address, my customer city, state, and postal code or zip code. I'm going to change this to just select the first one there, and I'm going to output a spatial object and the latitude and longitude associated with that address. I'm going to repeat those same steps for my store addresses to geocode those. I'm going to go in here, grab store address, store city, state, and store zip code, and grab those same pieces of information. Now at this point, I'm going to grab a browse tool and drop this on here and run this workflow. So at this point, at these tools, it's going through accessing some data to geocode those, And now we can actually see we have that data actually located specifically on a map. So we have, I highlighted the first point here. We can see that green dot there represents the actual store location, where the red dot that's highlighted represents that customer. We can see where they are actually physically on a map here. So another little cleanup here step. I can see here I've got, these are just titled spatial object, latitude and longitude, and let me go ahead and rename these so that I have customer point, and then customer lat and customer long. And then I'm going to do same with the store information so that I can just keep this data straight in my head when I look at the next steps. And so now that I've done that, I need to actually perform the step that was the original goal of this analysis, was to calculate the distance between these 2 points so that I can investigate that in my visualization tool like Tableau and see what effect that might have in my analytics. So I'm going to use a distance tool to calculate distance. And it's going to automatically populate with my geospatial points of data there. So my customer point and store point, I'm going to calculate the distance between those. I can also calculate drive distance. And because we can optimize or use the TomTom data set that is one of the packages within Alteryx, we can actually calculate along road networks and see how long it would take on a road network to travel to a location, and also the actual drive distance. So we can see, as line of sight, this is less than a mile away, but on a road network, the distance between these is about 2 miles. Okay, so we've performed those analytics. We've gotten some additional data enriched here, and we want to now export this to a visualization tool that we can use. Now, most data sources or most platforms outside of Alteryx can't really handle a spatial object point. So I'm going to deselect those points of data here, and then I'm going to output this data. So Alteryx is a great tool for doing all those steps in between of bringing your data together, processing it, doing analytics, and then we need to export and share this data to wherever we want to. So Alteryx can export to those flat file type things. So back to things like Excel documents or to something like a Tableau data extract, which is what we will do here. So we're going to, we call this customer distance TDE. And but in addition to exporting directly to a flat file, we can also export back out to the same databases. So you can write back to Redshift, you can write back to a SQL database. And as mentioned in the previous presentation here, we also have cloud connectors where you can connect to bring in data and write data out to things like Amazon S3, Salesforce, Marketo, etc. So basically we would run this workflow and we would have written an output, and this could update a Tableau dashboard if you had that directly set up to read off of that. In addition, we do have for Power BI and for Qlik to publish directly to dashboards, for instance, ones out on Tableau server or Tableau online, so that you can completely automate end-to-end the acquisition of data, processing, and upload directly to a visualization tool. So that's a quick demonstration of how to build out a workflow in Alteryx, and thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Raman to wrap things up, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to thank my co-presenters from AWS and DeepRoot Analytics, as well as Nick, for that great demo. As a next step, please visit us at alteryx.com/Alteryx for AWS to download your 14-day free trial of the Alteryx Designer to get hands-on experience with the platform. A follow-up email containing this URL will also be sent to all webinar attendees as a follow-up. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Bill for the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, Raman, Nick, Danielle, Mundus, thanks so much for that excellent presentation. We'll get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation because we've had a great many questions that have come in during the presentation. And we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. So during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Raman, Nick, Danielle, and Mundus if you'd like to get in contact with them following today's webinar. So let's get started. Danielle, DeepRoot is the customer in this scenario. Our audience would like to know, did it take you a long time before you felt comfortable or productive using AWS Redshift and Alteryx, or was it fairly fast?
Hi, Bill. That's a great question. You know, it's actually funny that you ask that. I'm actually a pretty new user to both AWS and Alteryx. I want to say maybe December of 2015 was when I really started to get a hands on Alteryx, and I probably didn't start until maybe 5 months ago to really combine the two. So it's amazing what you can do in kind of a short period of time. So don't be afraid to just jump in and kind of make a couple of mistakes and then get back on the horse.
Well, terrific. That's a great answer. And, you know, you talked about certain files that had 2 billion rows in them. Can you give us a little more scale? How many data sources do you have to work with in DeepRoot? And have you run into any size limitations with Alteryx?
Those are great questions. Again, so we handle right now about 7 to 10 data sources, and each of these data sources comes with a different size of data. So one of our biggest data sources comes with, I think on a daily basis, I'm importing about 50 to 80 million rows. And then there's a smaller one where we're maybe only doing about 20,000 a day. So we kind of have a wide range of what we're blending against. And you asked if I run into any kind of restrictions when it comes to Alteryx. So that's where scheduler comes really into play. If you don't have scheduler, sometimes, yes, a workflow may take, 5 hours. And that 5 hours, you're sitting there just waiting for it to be done because you're handling so many items. But the cool thing with scheduler is that you can kind of do that overnight and it doesn't mess with your process at all. So that's kind of been our workaround. But yes, there is that element of sometimes it's just going to take that long, whether you do it in SQL, Alteryx. I've never noticed that Alteryx is slower, though, than any of the other big programmatic shapers like Python Pandas or SQL itself.
Well, terrific. Well, thank you. You know, on a technical basis, Danielle, you mentioned and promoted the idea of using Designer and Scheduler. Let me ask the Alteryx folks, where can we go to find out more about these two particular functionalities and perhaps get some training or download some materials?
Great question.
So I can jump in
on. Oh.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So if you go to the Alteryx website, alteryx.com, we do have a resources tab where you can get more information about the server and the designer products. We can certainly offer a free trial of both, and there is also a great deal of training and documentation out in that resources tab as well. We have a fantastic community where you can look for information.
Okay, well, thank you. And another technical question about Alteryx in this environment. Should we be running Alteryx on-prem, or should we run it in the AWS cloud in order to make best use of its connection with Redshift and the data warehouse?
Great question as well. My suggestion would always be to run Alteryx where you have the majority of your data. That way you reduce the amount of transfer time of those large data sets. So if the majority of your data is sitting in Redshift, then certainly you can either set up server or desktop in a virtualized AWS environment, which is what Alteryx itself actually does for our systems and works very, very well.
Okay, terrific. Now here's a question that's near and dear to my heart as a data scientist. And I bet that Danielle and Raman and Nick will all have a response to this. And it's a question about handling missing data, particularly in this type of really messy polling data. So can you talk a little bit about what Alteryx allows you to do in handling that data? And Danielle, perhaps what you actually do in handling missing data.
So in handling all of this data, say the question one more time just to make sure that I understand it. I don't want to misrepresent you.
It's a question about how to handle missing data. That is what
missing
Alteryx
data.
lets you
Okay.
do. Yeah, missing data, and how you actually deal with it.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because we actually ran into a similar situation recently where we had some missing data. So the cool thing is that you can, like I mentioned earlier, set up some awesome intricate QA processes. So these processes, oftentimes we use that join node to kind of figure out where the missing data lies. So that's been really, really helpful. And even more so, it kind of shows the holes that you may have. So let's say that you have a certain data set and you want to compare it to a more recent one. That join will really, really identify those.
Terrific, terrific. And Raman, would you like to add about its capabilities, or Nick?
Sure. Just to add to what Danielle said, so going back to what I mentioned regarding the data enrichment, so we work with a number of different vendors that would allow you to bring in missing data. So say you have somebody's first name, last name, and maybe their zip, but you need their complete street address. We can definitely help you fill in those gaps by enriching your data with those third-party vendors.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Now, you've talked a lot about exporting to Tableau. And the audience would like to know, first of all, are other visualization platforms like Qlik also an alternative? And secondly, are we better off blending this data in Alteryx, or should we take advantage of, say, Tableau's ability to blend?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I can take the first part of that question. I was just going to say, in regards to the output, the beauty of Alteryx is you can build your workflow and have the workload be 70% done, and then say you want to output to multiple platforms, or perhaps you are just changing your visualization platform. All you have to do is drop in one of those new icons. So whether it's Qlik, Tableau, Salesforce Wave, Microsoft BI, we output to any of those tools, and it really is as simple as putting in a new drag and drop visualization tool. So that is one of the streamlined, that is one of the pieces that actually Alteryx does a great job of streamlining the workflow with.
Terrific.
And I'll hand it over to Nick for the second part.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Go ahead. Did someone want to add? Okay.
I was just going to say, in addition to that, it's really cool. Most of the time what we do at Deeproot is that we'll blend all of the data in Alteryx, and then like Raymond said, we'll kind of, once it's in Tableau, let's say we need to multiply a field by 100, or that we need to rename something or capitalize something. That's where we'll do kind of the nitpicky visual aspect of it. But when it comes to the actual data molding, we do it all in Alteryx.
Well, thank you. That's great to know. Well, Raman, Nick, Danielle, Mundus, thanks for some great answers to some very good questions. Now, for those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all those unanswered questions to the team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. You know, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for September 1st, that's our next DSC webinar, which is Maximizing Insight in the New Age of Data, combining IBM SPSS statistics and R for competitive advantage, and that'll be by IBM. Also, today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. And a special thanks again to Alteryx for their sponsorship and our speakers today, Raman Kaler, Nick Tussing of Alteryx, Daniel Mendheim of Deeproot Analytics, and Mundus Mumberg of Amazon Web Services for their insights into today's topic. My name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event, and I look forward to seeing you all again on September 1st. Have a great day.